black woman, 46 years old, standing on tired feet but unshaken, just showed the world what happens when a rich white man mistakes power for permission. He thought money could buy obedience, thought her silence was part of the service. He came in expecting to be worshipped. What he got instead was a lesson not loud, not violent, but unforgettable. She didn't yell. She didn't fold. She simply stood there, dignity wrapped around her like armor, while his insults fell flat on the polished marble floor of a Manhattan steakhouse. The room froze, not because he shouted, but because she didn't. This isn't just about race. It isn't just about class. It's about the lie that silence is weakness. And the moment a woman, invisible for decades, made the entire room see her, what she said next didn't just change the night. It changed everyone in it. Stay with. You're going to feel this. Harriet Walker never rushed. She moved through the chariot the way a seasoned jazz musician plays a solo, measured, intentional, unbothered by applause. The restaurant, tucked into the aging red brick elegance of West 72nd in Manhattan, had become her second home. Not in the sentimental way, but in the way a woman comes to know every creaking floorboard, every flicker of a dim bulb, every regular's order before they speak. At 46, Harriet had no illusions left about the world, and yet she'd never let it strip her of grace. She carried herself the way her Alabama-born grandmother taught her. Shoulders back, head high, voice low. Don't shout to be heard. Let your presence speak first. Her uniform was crisp, her apron spotless. Her name tag said Harriet, but it might as well have said still standing. Her hair, wrapped in a deep copper scarf, framed a face lined not by age, but by years of swallowing words that would have cost her shifts, rent, dignity. She had worked this floor 6 days a week for over half a decade, never called out once, not even the night she got the call from Jenna's school saying her daughter had fainted in gym class from skipping lunch. She had wiped down menus with trembling hands, then smiled through her section like nothing happened, because that's what mothers do. Jenna was 17 now, all sharp wit and soft eyes, waiting for college letters that might finally open a door neither of them had ever seen the inside of. Every glass Harriet polished, every filet she carried from the kitchen, every 8-hour shift without sitting down, each one was a step toward that door. She didn't complain. There was no time. Life hadn't asked her if she wanted to be a warrior. It simply made her one. The chariot was nearly full that Thursday night. Candlelight flickered across wine glasses. A cello version of Ain't No Mountain High Enough hummed from overhead. Harriet, Section 2, as always, flowed from table to table with a quiet rhythm. By 7:30, she had already refilled 14 water glasses, calmed a fussy toddler at table 9, and expertly de-escalated a dispute about undercooked lamb at table 6. No one clapped. No one needed to. She didn't serve for applause. She served because service, when done right, could feel like art. She was halfway through clearing the dessert plates at table 10 when the door opened again. Cold air brushed in like a warning. She glanced briefly at the man who entered, tailored suit, cufflinks that sparkled like contempt, smile sharp enough to draw blood. She didn't know his name yet. But Harriet Walker had been alive long enough to recognize a storm dressed like a man. And she knew one thing deep in her gut, the way only women like her ever do. He hadn't come here for dinner. He had come to test something. And Harriet, God help him, was not in the mood to fail. He arrived late but walked in like the clock belonged to him. Richard Gray wasn't just a man with money. He was the kind of man who used silence like a tool and interruption like a signature. The chariot didn't have a red carpet, but the way he stepped through the door, you'd think someone should have rolled one out anyway. A gray wool coat folded over his arm, a Rolex too loud for its own good, and a smile carved not from warmth but from practiced dominance. Harriet noticed him before he noticed her, not because she was drawn to him, but because women like her had learned to sense certain men the same way sailors learn to read the weight of the wind. She didn't look up right away. She finished garnishing a glass of Pinot Grigio with orange zest for a widow at table 6, murmured a kind word about the weather, and let the air shift as Richard's voice broke through the music like the scraping of silver on porcelain. "Where's the service in this place?" He asked not to anyone in particular, but to the room, the way a man speaks when he expects the walls to answer. Harriet took one breath, then two, as she approached. He didn't look at her at first. He looked around her, past her, through her, as if she were the ghost of some forgotten service. When he finally turned his gaze on her, it wasn't recognition. It was appraisal. "You the waitress?" he asked. She nodded once. "What can I get started for you tonight?" Her voice was warm, round and slow, not sluggish, but deliberate. He smiled the way wolves smile when they smell blood. "How about some actual attention? We've been here 15 minutes, maybe longer. You think that's acceptable?" Before she could answer, he leaned in. "Or are you one of those who think attitude counts as ambition?" His date, young, polished, silent, shifted in her seat, looking down at her menu like it held an escape route. Harriet didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She simply waited. Because some men aren't looking for answers. They're looking for submission. And Harriet Walker had stopped giving that years ago. "Still or sparkling?" she asked again, as if his noise hadn't reached her. Richard laughed. A short, sharp bark that sounded more like a performance than amusement. "That's cute. Trained to smile through disrespect, huh? You people really know how to stay in line." The air didn't just still, it condensed. Sound stopped traveling. Words stopped working. Something in the room twisted, then folded in on itself. And yet, Harriet's face didn't move. Her hands didn't tighten. Her breath didn't quicken. She simply looked at him, not with anger, not even pity, with something deeper, something more dangerous, a calm so centered it made chaos seem childish. When she spoke, it wasn't louder. It was lower. And because of that, every ear leaned in. "You mistake my silence for fear, sir. It's restraint, a luxury people like you rarely afford anyone but themselves." It landed like scripture in a room full of liars. He blinked. Once, then again, because Richard Gray was not used to having his reflection handed back to him in full daylight. He shifted in his seat, not from discomfort, but disorientation. He was losing the room and didn't know how. Harriet didn't wait for his next line. She stepped back, not out of retreat, but as if giving space for the weight of her words to settle. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not dignity. Certainly not from a woman who served steak tartare for a living. Certainly not from someone who didn't care who he was. That was the moment he began to shrink. And the room, oh, the room felt it. Harriet stood so still the room forgot she could move. Her hands weren't clenched, but they carried the weight of decades. Every shift worked while sick, every smirk she'd swallowed, every time someone called her girl like it was her name. She could still feel the sting of the night in '98, when she was passed over for a promotion, because the owner said customers preferred someone a little lighter. She had held back then, like she always did. For the rent, for the job, for Jenna. Always for Jenna. But tonight something was different. It wasn't Richard's words, those were predictable. The smugness, the sharpness, the assumption that his money came with permission to diminish. No. What cracked something open inside her was the way her daughter, seated 2 booths away waiting for a ride home from study group, had turned her head just enough to hear the insult. Harriet saw it in her eyes. That flash of recognition, that moment of realization. So this is what the world thinks of my mother. And Harriet couldn't let her daughter carry that weight too. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She looked at Richard Gray and said, slow and steady, like scripture she'd memorized with her soul, "You see a waitress. I see a woman who's held this world on her back and kept smiling because folding would have made your kind right. You want me to shrink so you can feel taller, but I stopped living small the day I gave birth to someone I refused to let grow up thinking silence is the price of dignity." The room didn't freeze, it shifted. As if everyone felt something sacred had just been spoken, something they weren't sure they deserved to hear. Even the air seemed to soften, bending around the truth. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired. Not tired like sleepy. Tired like a bridge that's held too many crossings and still refuses to collapse. Tired like a woman who's spent 20 years eating bitterness with grace and just now, just this once, let a single spoonful spill. Richard stared at her, as if trying to rewind what had just happened, to play it again and find the insult. But there was none, only truth. And truth, when spoken without apology, has a way of silencing even the most expensive arrogance. Jenna didn't say a word, but her eyes glistened with something new. Not pity, not shock, pride. Because in that moment, her mother wasn't just a woman in an apron. She was a monument. She was 17, and full of something that felt like hope, though she didn't know the name of it yet. It was her first real shot, an interview at a boutique called Delaney's on 14th Street, where the windows sparkled and the mannequins looked like women Harriet had never been allowed to be. She wore a pressed white blouse her mother had starched the night before, a skirt that pinched too tight around the waist, and shoes half a size too small borrowed from her aunt. The morning air in Harlem was thick with July heat, but her palms were colder than the train rails beneath her feet. She walked in smiling, standing tall, hiding the ache in her toes and the tremble in her stomach. The manager, a thin white woman with a voice like soft fabric and eyes that never stayed still, looked Harriet up and down before saying anything. "Sweetheart," she began, always sweetheart when they were about to wound you. "You've got a lovely face, but our clientele expects a certain kind of presence." She smiled as she said it, like she was offering Harriet a piece of candy instead of a humiliation wrapped in silk. Presence. That was the word that haunted her. Not experience. Not availability. Presence. She thanked her anyway. Walked out. Didn't even make it to the corner before the tears came hot and ugly down her face. The kind you wipe quick because crying too long in public when you're black and female becomes another reason to be dismissed. But that wasn't the worst part. 2 years later, she was working inventory at a department store downtown, mostly behind the scenes, folding, tagging, loading shelves. One day, the manager pulled her aside and said they needed help at the register. "Just for a shift," he said. "Dress nice." She showed up in her Sunday best, hair tied back, makeup light, nails clean. She smiled through every transaction. Then she heard it. A customer in pearls leaned in close to the manager and whispered, not knowing Harriet stood just behind the counter, "Are we letting them handle the money now?" Not even lowering her voice, not even hiding the venom, just saying it plain like it was protocol. The manager laughed. Harriet didn't say a word. She walked to the break room, sat down next to the vending machine that always stole her quarters, and stared at the wall like it might offer an answer. It didn't. Nothing did. But she made a vow right then, not out loud, but deep in the marrow of her bones. "One day, they'll speak to me like I'm less, and I'll look them dead in the eye without raising my voice and remind them I am not small because they need me to be." And that's the fire she carried for 30 years. Quiet, slow burning, until a man named Richard Gray lit the match that met her flame. For a moment, no one moved. Not the man refilling his water glass, not the woman dabbing her lipstick in the corner mirror. The air inside. The Chariot, a restaurant known for its quiet elegance and $40 lamb chops, had gone electric. Not loud, not violent, but crackling, charged, like the sky seconds before a lightning strike. Harriet's voice still lingered, soft but sharp, like a scalpel made of velvet. What she said wasn't loud, but it landed. You could feel it settle into people's bones. There was no dramatic music, no glass shattering, only silence, deep and holy, the kind that demands reverence. Zora Hamer, standing behind the espresso counter, froze mid-pour. Her fingers tightened around the steel milk pitcher, knuckles white. She had always admired Harriet, the way she moved through the world like a woman who'd learned to carry fire in a paper cup. But this was something else. This was ancestral. This was Harriet becoming more than just a colleague. She was a monument now, a living, breathing monument dressed in non-slip shoes and an apron stained with marinara. Zora didn't hesitate. She stepped from behind the counter, not in a rush, not to defend. She walked with precision, each step declaring, "This is who we are." When she reached Harriet's side, she said nothing, just stood with her, shoulders aligned, eyes forward, like soldiers in quiet formation. Richard Gray, once so sure of the stage he'd tried to steal, now looked smaller, not shrunken, but stripped. like a man caught naked in a room full of mirrors. He blinked once, then again. But the clever retort didn't come. For the first time, he looked unsure of what his money could buy. Then Thomas Beck moved. The manager of the Chariot was a man carved from years of diplomacy. He didn't run a restaurant, he conducted it. But now, he walked toward Harriet with the gravity of a man stepping onto sacred ground. Every eye in the room followed him, not because he demanded it, but because the moment required a witness. He didn't look at Richard at first. He looked at Harriet, looked, and in that gaze was something rare in men who wear power like a suit acknowledgement. Then, calmly, he turned toward Richard. "Sir," Thomas said, his voice low but firm, "you're welcome to stay as long as you remember this isn't your house, and she," his head tilted toward Harriet, "isn't your servant. She's staff. She's professional. And tonight, she's the one who reminded this whole room how to behave. Not a single fork moved. Not one breath was wasted." Zora's chin lifted slightly. Harriet's hands, though still, pulsed with warmth. And Thomas stood not as a manager, but as a man who'd finally decided which side of the story he wanted to be on. Across the room, a woman clutched her husband's arm, whispering, "Did you hear what she said?" He nodded. "I think the whole world did. But outside, the world didn't yet know." Inside the Chariot, though, something had shifted forever. Because in that moment, every single person realized this wasn't just dinner anymore. This was history served at table 9. Jenna Clark had never felt the air in a room shiver until that night. It wasn't the kind of cold that made your skin goosebump. It was the stillness. That aching, breathless stillness when something seismic is happening and the world, just for a moment, forgets how to blink. She had entered the Chariot quietly, like always. Hoodie up, earbuds still in, a stack of flashcards in her pocket. She had finals soon. Columbia, Johns Hopkins, Harvard. Dreams she'd scribbled in spiral notebooks since 8th grade. But when she saw her mother across the room, standing straight with her hands folded, facing a man who looked like he owned everything in the world, Jenna stopped breathing. And then Harriet spoke. Not loud, not angry, just clean. Like a blade so sharp it doesn't hurt until later. The words didn't echo, but they reverberated, like they had somewhere to go. They landed in Jenna's chest like an inheritance she never asked for, but suddenly understood. She saw it. Not the moment her mother resisted, but the moment she refused to be reduced. By a billionaire, by history, by the expectation that black women should serve, smile, and shrink. Jenna felt every eye in the restaurant shift, not to Richard, but to Harriet. The way planets turn toward gravity. And in that second, something rewrote itself inside her, because all her life, Jenna had been collecting achievements like armor straight, as AP classes, debate trophies. She had rehearsed excellence, hoping it might outrun the shadow of where she came from. But watching Harriet stand still in the face of humiliation, watching the room hush not out of fear, but out of reverence that taught her something school never could. Dignity isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't trend. It simply stays, unmoved. And in doing so, it moves everything else. That night, Jenna didn't run to her mother. She didn't cry or speak. She just watched, memorized, because she knew this would be her story, not just to remember, but to write, to tell, to submit. Her college essay wouldn't be about volunteering abroad or building water filters in the summer. It would be about the night the world saw her mother. And how in that stillness, Jenna found the voice that would carry her to Harvard, not because she was brilliant, but because she finally understood what brilliance looks like when it stands still and unbending in an apron. Harriet had left the Chariot like she did every Thursday. Head high, heart steady, steps slow, not from exhaustion, but from something heavier. Not defeat, not pride, just stillness, like a drumbeat waiting for its next note. She didn't know the storm had already begun. It started with a single tweet at 10:42 p.m. Waitress shuts down billionaire with one sentence. No yelling, no cursing, just obliteration. A 15-second clip, shaky from a diner's phone, capturing the moment Harriet didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on Richard Gray's, and she said what no one had ever dared tell him out loud. You must be exhausted, carrying that much hate into every room. At first, a few thousand watched. Then came the retweets and the stitches. Gospel choirs were layered under her voice. Black and white slow-motion edits, subtitles in 5 languages. She became not just a moment, but a mirror, a message, a monument. The comments rolled in like high tide after a hurricane. A hotel bellhop wrote, "My uncle got fired for talking back to a CEO who told him to smile more. He didn't. He just stood still." You reminded me of him. A nurse in Chicago posted, "My father was a quiet man. He worked 30 years in a hospital where they called him boy till the day he retired. But he never cracked. He listened. And then he spoke when it mattered." A woman from Alabama shared, "I watched this clip with my daughter. We cried. I said, 'This is how you carry yourself when they try to cut you down. You don't swing. You stand.'" By midnight, the clip had crossed 1 million views. By 3 a.m., national news anchors were tweeting it. Not with commentary, just with one word: respect. Harriet didn't sleep that night. Neither did Jenna. They sat on the couch in silence, lit only by the glow of her daughter's laptop, as notifications stacked like falling dominoes. Harriet didn't cry, didn't gloat. She just scrolled slowly, reading what the world had to say about a sentence she hadn't rehearsed, only carried inside her for 46 years. Jenna turned to her. "They see you now," she whispered. Harriet's reply was soft, almost a whisper. "No, baby. They see themselves." The sun hadn't yet risen fully over Manhattan, but the chariot already buzzed, not with orders or espresso shots, but with tension so fine you could slice it like prosciutto. Inside, the polished floors gleamed, the crystal glasses lined up like soldiers, but none of it could mask what had happened the night before. Thomas Beck stood by the maitre d's ledger, looking less like a manager and more like a man who had just remembered something he used to believe in. He had watched the video, like millions did, but for him, it wasn't just a viral clip. It was a confession, his own. He had been right there when it happened, behind Harriet, close enough to smell the tension off Richard Gray's cufflinks. But he hadn't moved. He hadn't said a word. And now, people all over America were calling him the statue behind the storm. Funny how silence could be louder than slurs when played back 3 million times. Just then, the door creaked. Zora Hamer stepped in, still in her oversized denim jacket, curls tucked under a scarf like a crown not yet polished. She carried 2 coffees. She didn't speak, just walked behind the bar, placed 1 cup gently on the back shelf where Harriet always grabbed it, and stood. Her eyes met Thomas's. "You froze," she said softly. He didn't deny it. "I thought, if I stepped in, I'd make it worse." And he, "No," Zora said, voice like velvet over fire. "You thought if you stayed quiet, you'd stay clean." He inhaled, shame, cutting deep and surgical. But Zora wasn't finished. She stood still, she continued, and the world moved. You stood still, and the world saw you not moving." Thomas lowered his eyes. Then, after a pause, he whispered something not meant for the room, but for himself. "I failed her." Zora took a step closer. "So don't fail her again." That's when the door opened. Harriet. She walked in like she always did, no makeup, apron in hand, a strength about her that didn't scream, didn't announce. It just existed, like mountains or tides. But this time, the air shifted. The kitchen staff fell silent. Line cooks turned. Busboys paused mid-polish. Even the dishwasher, Jamal, peeked out, holding a sponge like a shield. The storm hadn't broken the restaurant. It had baptized it. Thomas stepped forward. "Harriet," he said, voice almost reverent, "you want the day off? It's yours, with pay." She looked at him, not suspiciously, not gratefully, just seeing him for the first time. "I didn't come here to be rescued," she said. "I came here to work." He nodded. "Then let me do mine, and do it better." Zora came up beside her, handed her the coffee. "Strong, no sugar." Harriet smiled, only slightly. "The way I like it." And in that moment, the old world cracked. Not with a bang, but with a cup of coffee handed in solidarity, and a silence finally broken by choice, not cowardice. For 3 nights, Richard Gray could not sleep, not because of public outrage, he'd faced that before, not because of headlines or social media storms. He'd weathered bigger ones and outlasted them all. No, what haunted him wasn't the video. It was the moment after. When Harriet said it, "You must be exhausted carrying that much hate into every room." And the entire restaurant froze. But she didn't. That sentence didn't come from anger. It came from somewhere colder, deeper, a place where truth no longer needed volume. That was what haunted him. At first, he tried to dismiss it, poured himself one 8-year-old scotch in a $400 crystal tumbler, watched his stocks climb another half point, told himself she was just another waitress with attitude. But at 2:17 a.m. on the second night, standing barefoot in his glass-walled kitchen high above Fifth Avenue, he whispered into the silence, "I was wrong." No press release, no publicist, just Richard, the man behind the empire. On the third morning, he picked up a pen, not a keyboard, and he wrote, not a statement, a letter. "To Miss Harriet Walker, I said things I can't erase. You replied with a single sentence that exposed everything I've hidden behind for years. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I wouldn't know what to do with it. What I am doing is changing. Quietly. Permanently. I've made arrangements to fund the full education of 10 young black women entering leadership programs in food and hospitality. No press, no interviews, no tax breaks. My name won't appear anywhere. Yours will. I was taught that power meant never having to say sorry. You've shown me that real power is saying it without needing anything in return. R.G." He sent the letter by hand. No assistant. No limo. A quiet delivery, left at the back door of the Chariot under early morning fog. When Harriet received it, she didn't open it right away. She didn't need to. She felt the weight in her palm. Later, sitting alone in the break room, she unfolded the paper. Read every line. Once, then again. No emotion on her face, but her breath shifted just enough for the stillness to tremble. Zora found her there watching the sunrise through the smudged window. She asked, "You okay?" Harriet nodded. "I think." He finally heard me. "Are you going to write back?" "No," Harriet said, folding the letter cleanly with both hands. "The letter wasn't for me." Zora blinked. "Then who?" Harriet looked outside, at the city rising like it always did, for the man he used to be, so he can never become him again. That afternoon, another envelope arrived. It was a certified receipt, $250,000 donated. Full tuition, 10 names. No sender, but under purpose, typed in black ink. It read, "In honor of the woman who didn't lower her voice to be heard." Most people assumed my mother was just a waitress. But that night, in a crowded restaurant under soft jazz and sharper knives, she served something no one had ordered. A billionaire insulted her, loudly, cruelly. And she didn't flinch. She didn't shout. She looked him in the eye and asked one simple question. "You must be exhausted carrying that much hate into every room." She wasn't angry. She was clear, and the whole place changed. It didn't matter that she made minimum wage, that she had holes in her shoes, that she was black, tired, and had a teenage daughter watching from the corner. She didn't lower her voice to be heard. She stood so tall in her silence that even noise had to bow. A stranger filmed it. The video went viral. People talked about it like it was a movie. But to me, it was dinner. It was my childhood. It was survival wrapped in poise. That sentence fed more than a room. It fed a movement. It fed me. And 1 week ago, a letter arrived. No name. Just a certified receipt. $250,000 donated. Full tuition. 10 names. Under purpose, it read, "In honor of the woman who didn't lower her voice to be heard." So no, my mother wasn't just a waitress. She was a storm contained in grace. She was dignified in an apron. She was the reason I'm standing here today. And if Harvard is the table, then she is the reason I got a seat. The front door closed with a hush. Jenna stepped into the dim kitchen, still in her ceremony dress, heels in hand, the Harvard red honor cord looped like a ribbon of fire across her shoulders. Harriet didn't turn. She stood at the sink, motionless. staring at a chipped plate like it held some secret she hadn't solved yet. Jenna broke the silence. You weren't there. Harriet's fingers tightened around the sponge. I saw it on the live stream. I looked for you, Jenna said, her voice small and sharp like a crack in glass. Harriet finally turned, and what Jenna saw wasn't guilt. It was fear, pride, something that I couldn't decide which to wear first. I couldn't, Harriet said, not because I didn't want to, because I didn't think I'd survive hearing them say your name like that. Harvard, doctor, full ride, my baby. Jenna stepped forward, setting her heels on the floor like she was done running. You remember what you said that night in the restaurant? Harriet didn't answer. Jenna took a breath, pulled something from her purse, a folded copy of her essay. She opened it and read. She didn't serve them food. She served them awakening. Then she looked up. They called my name today, Mama. But the echo, that was yours. Harriet sat down like her legs gave out. Jenna knelt, took her hand. No tears. Just a silence so full it bent the air. You didn't raise a doctor, Jenna whispered. You raised a mirror. And I finally see what's been standing in front of me all these years. In the corner, the kitchen light flickered once, then held steady. The billionaire left. The camera stopped. The room moved on. But not the sentence. They say thunder is loudest when it strikes. But that night, the loudest thing was a whisper. She didn't scream. She didn't break. She just stood there unshaken and said, You must be exhausted, carrying that much hate into every room. And the world stopped pretending it didn't hear. From that moment on, people no longer asked, What did he say? They asked, How did she say it? She didn't serve dinner that night. She served dignity, and it fed the room. They put it on murals, on t-shirts, in classrooms. They quoted it in courtrooms. It became something more than viral. It became a memory. And in a quiet staff hallway, someone taped up the donation receipt, no sender, just a single line typed in black. In honor of the woman who didn't lower her voice to be heard. That wasn't just about her. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a loud world, it is to say one true thing and stand still while the room shifts around you. What you just witnessed wasn't just a story, it was a reckoning. A woman unseen and underestimated stood her ground, not with rage but with truth. Harriet didn't demand the room's respect. She revealed why she already deserved it. And in that moment, power didn't look like a billionaire in a suit. It looked like a black woman who refused to bend. This isn't just about race or class or gender. It's about all of us. It's about how we respond when no one expects us to speak. It's about what silence can mean, not surrender, but strength. So I ask you, when the moment comes, will you speak? Will you stand still and let the world feel your weight? If this story moved you, let it move someone else. Share it, pass it forward, and tell us below what moment in your life changed everything without raising its voice. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Stories that don't just entertain, but awaken. Your voice matters here. Your presence shapes this space. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. And above all, thank you for remembering dignity isn't loud, but it echoes.